This is Crime Dog. Roll the intro. Ghislaine Marchal is the wealthy widow of Jean-Pierre Marchal, founder of a well-known auto parts company. She splits her time between her primary residence in Switzerland and her villa La Chamade, which she had built in the hills of Mougins on the Côte d'Azur. It's pretty much like the Beverly Hills of the south of France. That Sunday, she receives a call just before midday. It's her friend Erica. She makes plans to meet her for lunch the following day and has to cut the call short because she's in a rush to go meet some other friends for lunch. She never makes it to either of these engagements. When she doesn't show, her friend Colette calls at around 1:30 p.m. to find out where she is. The phone just rings out. At 6 p.m, Colette goes around to the villa and rings the bell. Again, no answer, so she leaves and goes home, expecting to get a call from Ghislaine to explain what had happened. The following day, Erica arrives for lunch as planned at 11:30. Just as Colette the day before, she rings the bell. Again, no response. She calls out her name, but to no avail. Both friends now are deeply concerned. A third friend, Francine, gets involved and calls a security company that patrols the villas. A man arrives on the scene, and when he tries the door, it opens. The keys are still hanging on the inside, and the alarm is off. He makes his way around the villa. The bed is not made. Madame Marchal's glasses are on the bedside table, but no sign of her. It's time to call the police. They also check the house but find nothing untoward. They exit the villa and focus their attention on an adjoining building to the main house. A set of stairs leads them down to a basement. Some kind of storage room used for pool equipment and laundry lies behind a large metal door. They locate the key and try to push the door open, but it's blocked. There's something behind the door stopping it from opening. After a few minutes, an officer manages to get his arm behind the door and push out of the way whatever was hindering them. It still won't budge though. There's a metal pipe blocking the bottom of the door. They finally manage to kick it out of the way, and after 20 minutes, they are in. They turn on the light and slowly make their way through the basement. It's not until they reach the boiler room that they see something. It's the lifeless body of Ghislaine Marchal, face down in a pool of her own blood. She's just wearing a dressing gown and her body is covered in wounds. Police sweep the area and suddenly they spot something on a white door leading to the wine cellar. In what appears to be blood approximately 1 meter off the ground, clear as day, it says OMAR M'A TUER. Then, just opposite the entrance on another door, the same phrase but incomplete and much harder to make out. OMAR M'A TUER. They leave the boiler room with an immediate lead. Who is Omar? They question Madame Marchal's neighbours, and it doesn't take them long to find out. One of them tells them that her gardener is called Omar Raddad. According to the lady, he was working at her place on Sunday afternoon, but he also helps out in Madame Marchal's garden. The next day, investigators track down the Moroccan gardener, who is with his wife, 2 kids, and his wife's parents, and they arrest him. The interrogation isn't easy. Even though Omar has been in France for 6 years, his French isn't that great. No lawyer is present, and police would later say he never requested an interpreter. He appears shocked to hear about Madame Marchal's demise, and he denies any involvement in her murder. At this stage of the investigation, police have zero hard evidence to pin Omar to this crime. But the bloody message left on the door is damning, and for them it is enough to charge him with voluntary homicide, and he is immediately imprisoned. The autopsy takes place 4 days after the discovery of the body. Madame Marchal received 5 blows to the head with a wooden beam which was found at the scene. But that's not all. She'd been stabbed around 10 times in total, to the chest and stomach with a sharp object of approximately 15 to 20 centimeters long. No such object was recovered from the scene. Madame Marchal was a defenseless 65-year-old woman. What could have provoked an attack of such violence? They conclude she must have tried to defend herself as bones in her fingers were broken. The pathologist was unable to identify which of the blows actually killed her, but they identify the time of death to be between 12 and 2 p.m. Omar is questioned again and asked about his whereabouts on that day. He states that on the Sunday morning he worked at Madame Pascal's house, which she had already concurred. He claims that he left at midday to go back to his home on his scooter. No witnesses saw him leave. He then says at 12:05 he stopped at a bakery to buy some bread, providing a detailed description of the employee who served him. He arrived home at around 12:15, 12:20. When he got there, he said he bumped into the manager of the local supermarket in the lobby of his building and they had a brief conversation. Back in his apartment, he made himself a cup of tea, had a bite to eat, and he watched TV while having a smoke. He then left his place at around 12:40 to go back to work. On the way back, he stopped at a phone box to call his wife. The time was about 12:50 now, arriving back at Madame Pascal's villa at around 1:10 Police tried to corroborate his story, firstly by going to the bakery. Nobody who works there remembers seeing Omar Raddad that day. Same for the supermarket manager. He has no recollection of running into Omar in the building. On top of that, on that day, he was with friends who also know Omar, and none of them remember seeing him either. They do, however, manage to get rid of phone records and confirm the call that he said he made to his wife. The neighbor Francine Pascal doesn't believe that he is guilty for 1 second, but she neither saw him leave at 12 or come back at 1. So unfortunately for Omar, between the time that he left at 12 and the time that the call was put in at 12:51 to his wife, he has no solid alibi. In this short window, he could have very well made his way to Madame Marchal's villa, which was close by, and murdered her. They check the crime scene for prints, but they are unable to lift anything off the bloody doors. No prints are found on the inside of the metal entrance door either, nor on the bed frame, which was the object used to block the door, or the metal pipe, which was found on the ground. There are no footsteps, no blades of grass. Omar had been working in the neighbor's garden all morning. Police also found no blood on the clothes he was wearing that day, which had not been washed yet. Police downplay this as they suggest there was no blood splatter because all the blood was absorbed into Madame Marchal's dressing gown. All these small discrepancies are brushed to one side. There is only really one suspect in this case, and they don't try very hard to look anywhere else. Surprisingly, her body is quickly handed over to her family, and on July the 1st, a judge authorizes the family to cremate Madame Marchal, and on the 3rd of July, just 5 days after the autopsy, she is cremated. Omar's defense team are livid. It takes away the opportunity for them to question anything that came out through the autopsy, or to even get a second opinion. Plus, according to one of Madame Marchal's friends, she had always dreamt about being buried in a lavish vault, not cremated. At this stage of the inquiry, some journalists stoked by Omar Raddad's lawyers start to cast doubt on the police's version of events. There are several massive issues to get to the bottom of here. It took police 20 minutes to get into the room. Would Madame Marchal, at 65 years old, having received multiple blows to her head and several stab wounds to her body, have the energy to drag herself over to the door, place a 12-kilo bed frame against the door, barricade it further with an iron bar, then crawl over to 2 separate doors to write a message in her own blood before dying in the middle of the room? If she knew before she died that Omar had killed her, why would she even bother locking herself in the room in the first place? She also managed to achieve this in the dark. When officers entered the basement, the light was off. However, the writing OMAR M'A TUER on the wall was perfectly straight. But if Madame Marchal was the only person found in the room, how could someone else have blocked the door shut from the inside and managed to escape at the same time? There was only one way in and one way out of the basement. If it's Madame Marchal who blocks it, we have no reason to doubt that the name written on the doors, Omar, is our assassin. However, if someone managed to frame Omar to cover their own crime, pulling the door shut from the outside, that's a different story. To check if the second hypothesis is even possible, the judge orders a team to go back to the basement and attempt to pull the bed frame and the pipe against the door from the outside. And they do manage to block the door, but it doesn't resist for anything like the 20 minutes that it took police to enter the first time round. The bloody words left on the doors are another fascinating element to this case. Why would you go to the effort of writing on a door in your own blood the person that had killed you while you were still alive? Is that what would be going through your mind at that horrible moment? And why try and write the same thing twice? The second element to this message is just as intriguing. Unless you are French or speak French, you may not have noticed the glaring error in this sentence. It's not correct French to say Omar M'A TUER. The correct spelling should be Omar M'A TUER in the past tense. Why would such a sophisticated, well-to-do woman make such an obvious spelling error? So if we are to believe the bloody words on the door, Omar killed Madame Marchal, it all seems too staged, too easy. So if she didn't write it, who did? Certainly not Omar, so another person who wanted to frame him for the murder. Investigators request more information from two writing experts who very loosely confirm that Madame Marchal wrote the messages due to the similarities in certain letters found in her house. They ask if someone could have forced her to write it under duress, and they say given the fluidity of the writing, this is not what happened. This, however, is no exact science, so it's difficult to know for sure. If Omar did do this, then the question has to be why? Nothing was stolen from the villa. Was he short of money? Apparently, yes, he was a gambler, and he was well known in the casinos around Cannes, slot machines to be precise. And apparently he would often ask to be paid in advance. Is it possible that he asked Madame Marchal for money, and when she refused, he lost it and violently attacked her? Up until this point in the investigation, Omar remains discreet, rarely shouting his innocence. After 2 years of gathering information, the prosecution think they have enough, and they put him on trial. It begins on the 24th of January 1994. For the defense, the level of violence and sheer number of wounds suggests more a crime of passion, which doesn't fit well with Omar Raddad, who had a good relationship with his employer. They state to the fact that no marks or scratches were found on Omar's hands, nor blood in his clothes. The severity of her wounds would also make her blocking the door and writing the messages highly implausible. They suggest a staging of the scene. Either the killer wrote on the doors or dragged an unconscious Madame Marchal around the room and then using her fingers dipped in her own blood to write the messages. The prosecution claims that Raddad came to the villa looking for money, but when she refused, he lashed out and struck her several times with a wooden beam that he found in the basement. Still alive, he then went to grab some hedge shears, which he used to stab her multiple times. He then cleans it, puts it back in its place, and steals some money from Madame Marchal's bag. He then leaves her for dead, but she is still alive. She barricades the door in case her attacker returns, and then writes his name on the doors. Having heard all the evidence, the deliberation lasts 6 hours. The verdict is pronounced on February the 2nd, and Omar Raddad is found guilty and sentenced to 18 years in prison. His wife faints and falls to the ground as the sentence is called out. Omar just sits there and stares into the distance. His lawyer immediately states that he was found guilty due to his race.
Il y a 100 ans, on condamnait un jeune officier qui avait le tort d'être juif. Aujourd'hui, on condamne un jardinier parce qu'il a le tort d'être maghrébin.
And from that moment, the case becomes political. The day after the verdict, Omar Raddad's lawyer hires a private detective. And in April 94, Maître Vergès brings forward a new witness, Patricia Clark, a neighbour of Madame Marchal, who claims to have seen a white van with no plates parked outside her villa on the day of the murder. Inside the van, she saw what appeared to be blood stains and wooden beams. The van then disappeared, leaving behind a plastic bag containing paper towels with brown stains and a screwdriver. She called the police and described the tool and the contents of the bag. Police replied, "That's not what we're looking for, it's too long," and they told her to throw it away. After being denied several applications for release, something unusual happens. Following a visit to France by the King of Morocco, French President Jacques Chirac gives Omar a partial pardon. He is now exempt from carrying out his sentence, but on paper he is still guilty. Omar leaves prison 2 years later. He is not done there though. He is adamant he wants to clear his name, and it is possible for him to overturn the decision if any new information comes to light that the court wasn't aware of during the trial. On February the 2nd, 2000, exactly 6 years after his sentence was handed out, an independent commission orders a new inquiry into the handwriting. And a year later, using new techniques, a DNA analysis of the blood found on the doors and the wooden beam. On all 3 surfaces, they find DNA. Experts confirm that male DNA was found, but none of it belonging to Omar Raddad. However, they are unable to say who it does belong to. The man's DNA is not on record. 2 separate DNA types were found mixed in with the victim's blood. As the years go by, more DNA tests have been done, and they have found more male DNA, none of it belonging to Omar Raddad. But each time his defense team attempt to quash his conviction, it is rejected. In fact, just last month, on October the 13th, 2022, Raddad's last request for review was rejected again. I don't know what you guys think, but the fact that he is so adamant that he must clear his name makes me think that maybe he didn't do this. He is no longer in prison, so why go to all this effort? But if Omar didn't kill Madame Marchal, then who did? As far as we are aware, there are no other suspects. And if someone did manage to frame Omar, the hardworking gardener, then how did they manage to escape from the room, which was blocked from the inside? I did find some speculation that there may have been some kind of exit through the wine cellar, which was at the back of the room, but nothing concrete to suggest that there was any other way out. Let me know in the comments if you think that Omar did this, or if you have any other theories on what you think happened in that basement. Subscribe and enable notifications if you want to stay up to date with our latest releases. And until next time, my fellow crime dogs, have a wonderful day, look after yourselves, au revoir.